to me then, I bet they feel me now. Time don't let me lose it. The booth not about to prove it. I set goals and pursue it. You the best to never do it. Invest my money talking fluent, stupid, ducking the Judas. It broke my heart, but open my eyes. You have no honor, I have no choice. Chasing the commas till I'm a goner. Been left for a minute. On my way home, mama, I promise, got caught up in it. Damn. Everybody eats when I'm batting at the plate. First, second, third, home, $1 million base.
Ladies and gentlemen, we back. You know who I am.
That Hotep Jesus dude.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
And the new one, I got to shorten this one, but it's still in the soundboard until I shorten it.
Do you think I don't love Hotep Jesus? I love that guy. He's terrific.
Shout out to the chat. Appreciate you, mods. Mods are going to be heavy on their job. So I appreciate the mods. The mods are mini tyrants, mini dictators. So whatever they say goes. Tread lightly, chat. Anyway, shout out to my sponsor, Syscoin, the best of Bitcoin, the best of Ethereum, using merge mining to provide security to the network of Bitcoin, and using the flexibility of Ethereum smart contracts, as well as EK Robes to make this thing speedy. So make sure you guys get in tune with Syscoin, a wonderful, wonderful cryptocurrency ecosystem. Great new announcements coming soon. I can't say anything yet, but great new announcements coming soon. I want to shout out to Patrick and those guys over there, over at the Syscoin team. Appreciate you. Men of Order, menoforder.com, all things men and masculinity. Make sure I get in tune. And of course, my herbal nootropic master focus, the thing that keeps my brain sharp and allows me to have these big brain conversations. But today, my guest is Gonzalo Lira. Gonzalo, what's up, man? How you feeling?
Pretty good. Yourself? Thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it. And chat, how's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You reached out to me this morning. I did see your exchange here with Scott Adams. I'm going to bring that up on the screen really fast, and then you're going to give me some history. I told you not to give me any history in the green room. I wanted to be surprised. So here we have, you said here, Scott is a complete P word.
Yeah. Because he blocked me, you know. I wasn't mean to him until he blocked me. I think that's I mean, if you're having like an exchange with somebody, which we had several.
Well, let's go. Let's go through the exchange here. Let's go back to the history of the exchange here.
Sure. It starts a while back though. It starts because Scott Adams.
Well, let me read the tweet, and then you can give us the backstory, right? Because it says here, you tweeted, half the newspapers that carry Dilbert are dropping the cartoon strip now, and I'm sure the other half will follow soon enough. So I ask you, Scott Adams, are you going to give a groveling apology, or will you stand up like a man and start calling the truth the truth? Somebody responds, he say, as soon as he came clean on the vax mandates, they knifed him hard, just like with Kyrie Irving. And Scott Adams responds, double fake news. To which you responded, you didn't answer the question, Scott. Are you going to cuck out like a coward, or are you going to stand up for truth like a man? Inquiring minds want to know. Yeah. Then you said, I bet Scott Adams will give a groveling apology. He'll claim he was taken out of context and will go away for a bit from social media to do some soul searching and reflection on the harm I've caused. Send me the screenshot of this sniveling apology when he puts it. Okay, now go ahead and give us the back history. You said this has some history to it. Go ahead and give that to us.
Yeah, I never really paid attention to Scott Adams because he kept insisting that he was the only one who had called the whole Trump situation, when Ann Coulter clearly was the winner of that score. But I followed him, because he was mildly amusing, and a lot of times he would talk about things that were actually in the air. So he's just part of my feed. And what he posted was that he had taken the vax, okay, or let's call it the medicine, to not get you into trouble. He had taken the medicine, and apparently he regretted it, buyer's remorse and all that. And he asked, out loud to the audience on Twitter, those of you, because he had done a big analysis as to why he was taking the medication. And see, and he thought that his analysis was correct and proper, and it was on point, and he had gone ahead and taken the medication, and later to his regret. And he asked a very sensible question, which was, how come those of you who did not take the medication, what did you know that led you to not take the medication? Which is a very interesting question for me in particular, because in university, I studied epistemology, which is theory of knowledge. It's a branch of philosophy. And that's where I did most of my work when I was at Dartmouth. And so it's a really interesting question. When do you know not to do something, as opposed to when do you know to do something? And so I answered him, and my answer was basically, it boils down to not enough time to test this medication, that it was rolled out in December of 2020. And, most medicines take years, if not over a decade, to be fully tested to ensure that they don't have some very detrimental side effect. And so I laid this out. I actually did a short video about it on one of my channels. And the thing is, see, I thought that, he would address the issue, because it's a really interesting issue of epistemology, of how you know reality. But then he did this weird flip, and I started going through his feed and other disputes that he has had with other people. And I realized that what he does is that, when he makes a decision, it's always the right decision. And when it turns out subsequently that it was wrong, he accuses the people who made the right decision of just being lucky. Because that's what he basically said, that the people who had not taken the medication had just, gotten lucky. They made the wrong guess, but got lucky with the outcome, which is nonsense, okay? Because anybody who knows anything about medicine knows that drugs have pernicious side effects that often are not revealed for years, if not decades. Witness thalidomide. Thalidomide was this drug which was marketed in the late 50s, early 60s for pregnant women. It was sort of like a mild tranquilizer, and it had very pernicious effects on pregnant women and their fetuses. They were born without limbs. Those that survived were born with like little winglets for arms and no legs. I mean, really horrifying stuff, and stuff that I grew up in the 70s, and I remembered very clearly a boy older than me in my school who had been a victim of thalidomide. And so I that always was ingrained in my head, that any drug, you had to really test it. And so in December of 2020, when the medication were rolled around, I thought, I'm not going to take this stuff because it's not been tested. And then later, when I learned that it was the first time that they were using mRNA technology in quote unquote vaccine, i.e. it was really gene therapy, I was doubly negative on the medication.
So did he freeze? I think he froze. He's out in Ukraine. Oh, there he is. You're there now. Okay. Well, here's my thing, right? When Scott says people have gotten lucky, right?
Yeah.
There's two groups here. There's groups that took the medicine and groups that didn't take the medicine. Mm-hmm. So for the group that didn't take the medicine, there's actually different segments there. They're the people like you and myself who have done the research and knew not to take it. And then there's, I would say, a large majority that were just skeptic, right? Yeah. And just said, I don't know anything about this stuff. I don't know anything good for it or bad against this. I'm just not taking it because I'm skeptical, right? And this is a large amount of that was the black community, just based upon history, Tuskegee experiment, etc. They're like, yeah, I'm good. I'll take my chances with the bug. In that regard, for that group, which I would say is a larger segment than people that have actually done the research, Scott is correct. That group got lucky. right? Because based
No,
upon
I would argue not.
let me finish.
Okay.
What I'm saying is they got lucky because their information wasn't based upon much data. It wasn't based upon any sort of knowledge. It was based purely on speculation and a guess and a hunch. In that case, you are rolling the dice. So I would say Scott, in that regard, is correct. That group got lucky.
You want me to answer now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely false.
Okay.
And it's very easy because simply because you are skeptical about something does not mean that you are lucky. Okay. Being cautious about something, about embarking on some activity, does not imply that you are lucky if later that caution proves to have been warranted. That's not how epistemology works. That's not how understanding the reality around you works. Okay. To claim that somebody was skeptical about something and decided to hold off and see how it would affect other people, that actually is completely reasonable and rational. Okay. So I do not subscribe to the notion that, the people who are skeptical got lucky. No, it was a reasonable doubt as to whether this medication would be effective, especially considering the fact that, for instance, I'm here in Ukraine, okay? And here in Ukraine, about 1 in 5 people knows a soldier who has been killed in the war, in the conflict that's happening here in this country, okay? Now, in the United States, how many people actually knew, primary direct evidence of somebody who had died of COVID? Not many, because the propaganda machine of the press led people to conclude that millions and millions of people were dying of this malady, when in fact the number was exceedingly small, and it was really reduced to people who had comorbidities or who were elderly. And so the fact that people would say, hey, well, there's this medicine for this malady. I don't know anybody who has died of it. I know a few people who have gotten it and they've gotten better. And there's this untested medication that they're pushing relentlessly for something that doesn't seem that big of a deal. No, that was a completely rational decision, a completely rational appreciation of the risk-reward equation. And so to say that they just got lucky, no, it's just a way for Scott Adams to continue to self-perceive himself as some guru. And that's when I realized that the guy's full of shit. I don't have a problem saying it because he is full of shit. He is a midwit guy who thinks that he's incredibly clever, and he's not. And whenever he makes a mistake, the other guy got lucky. Wouldn't you know it? This is absurd.
So I agree with both of you, right? Like, people who were skeptic and waited made a rational decision. I totally agree with that. Me being an objective person, I put myself in the shoes of the person that's speaking. So putting myself in your shoes, I'm like, you're right. Putting myself in Scott's shoes, I'm like, I get how he can rationalize the lucky argument because these people aren't making decisions based upon evidence. Now, I saw Scott's tweet and he said, what you said, right? How'd you guys come up with your decision, whatever. And I was like, Scott, just follow the Hoteps. That was my response. Next time, just follow the Hoteps because we had the experts on my channel. We had them on pre-COVID and during COVID and after COVID. We're still having Dr. Tanai Ricks, Project Rook, Sister Samaya, who was warning us about religious exemption moved from schools. So I told Scott, and I saw that. But again, I think my issue, Gonzalo, is why do we care? Why do we care how Scott chooses to maneuver? Is he that important that we have to try and expose him for being, because he's not a politician?
You're right. You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you why. Because it's fun to kick a midwit around every once in a while. It amuses me. Because I think he's a midwit. He is a guy who thinks he's much more intelligent than he actually is. Okay, truly intelligent people, they recognize that they can make mistakes, and they're willing to admit to those mistakes. Yeah, I certainly have made a lot of mistakes. For instance, the day before the war started here in Ukraine, I was adamant about the fact that there wouldn't be any war. And here I am 1 year later, with pie in my face insofar as my incorrect belief at the time. Though in my defense, there was some information that I was not aware of, that very few people were aware of, in fact, that would lead to the decision of the Russians to invade Ukraine. But my point is, see, if you are a truly intelligent man, you recognize when you fucked up, when you completely screwed the pooch and made a colossal mistake, and you got pie on your face. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. Here's the key issue that I've noticed with midwits in particular. See, these people who have an aggrandized sense of themselves and of their intellect and knowledge. See, the truly wise man doesn't have a problem admitting when he's wrong. He'll be the first to admit it. But the midwit has to protect his delicate sense of self by throwing up what you said, rationalizations. Because you characterize what Scott was saying as a rationalization, which is exactly correct. It was a rationalization, rather than just standing up and saying, I fucked up. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. There's nothing wrong with admitting when you make a mistake. But what is wrong, and which I find amusing on a personal level, is, with some guy who's posted himself up as this great predictor, because he calls himself the great predictor, which I find cringy. And he puts himself up there that he's always right. And when he's wrong, he tries to, I find it funny. Okay. And if you look through my Twitter feed, Scott Adams occupies a very small corner of my attention. I just reached out to you because he's just a little midwit that I like kicking around. Okay. He's my amusement, Dogs have like a tennis ball. I have Scott Adams. Okay. And let me have my fun.
Is that what this is?
Yeah. I don't have a problem admitting it. I mean, when I'm thinking about serious issues like AI and its effects on employment, like the conflict here in Ukraine, like the current diplomatic moves of China vis-a-vis Russia and the United States, and the coming war in China in 2025, those are serious issues. They're serious topics, and I treat them seriously. But insofar as this, man, I mean...
Wait, audio cut out.
Let me have my fun. Let me have my tennis ball. Let me kick him around a little bit because it's funny.
No, absolutely not. I will not stand by that. Number one, Scott's a friend of mine. But number two,
you're robbing me of my fun.
Yes, absolutely. For example, right? Like, you called him the P word because he blocked you.
Yeah, he's a pussy.
I'm notorious for blocking people for even the most minor offenses, right? So for me,
okay. Sorry, please go ahead.
So for me, if you are rude, irrational,
I'm not irrational. I'm not
purposely annoying. This is my list of things right here. Purposely annoying, you're getting blocked. I'm not afraid. You don't, it seems like, for example, right? Like if I were Scott Adams to you, right? It's like, well, since you don't like me, since I'm a problem, let me block you for you. So you don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm doing you a favor.
I'm not going to worry about him anymore, but yeah, I understand your point. No, I personally, just to be clear, I block people left and right, specifically the NAFO people, the North Atlantic Fellow Organization, or just trolls. They're literally government-paid trolls, which is pathetic.
Yeah,
I block those on site because they're just annoying, and they clutter up my replies, and I'm interested in the replies of my followers on Twitter. Yeah, insofar as, and obvious trolls also, but somebody who has an established reputation and a established following, I never block them. Because even if I completely and vehemently disagree with them, I'm interested in what they have to say. Because as far as I'm concerned, there are two possibilities when I'm arguing with somebody that I completely disagree with. Number one, they are wrong and I'm right, which is good for me.
Yeah.
Number two, they are right, and they are raising issues that I had not considered, And therefore, if I pay attention to them, even if I disagree with them or on a personal level despise them, if I listen to them and understand their argument, I can rethink my own position and hopefully arrive at a better, more clear position, more closer to the truth, as it were.
Yeah.
So either way, it's a win for me to be engaging with people that I vehemently disagree with. And quite frankly, also the obvious thing, you know, I treat Twitter as an entertainment, and being in complete agreement with somebody, that gets old really fast. It's much more interesting when you have conflict and disagreement.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he basically knew that I had him on the frying pan, and he pussied out. You know?
But my thing is, you're not. Let's assume Scott's a midwit. You're not.
He is. Come on.
You're not. I would not agree with that.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't think you're handling the midwit correctly, right? Like, if you're the great, philosopher guy you say you are.
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not claiming to be a big philosopher guy. I'm an idiot.
You said you studied.
I'm so stupid. I got myself caught in the middle of a goddamn war. How smart do you think I actually am? Man?
Well, that's what I'm saying. To me, it looks like two midwits. Assuming Scott's a midwit, it seems like you're the midwit too, because you've brought yourself down to that level. When I view a midwit, I view myself as saying either I'm going to bring the midwit up to my level, or we're not going to deal with him at all, or we're going to figure out some way we can use the midwit for the better of humanity, right? So, when I see these things and I see people and I see how they move, I don't call it out. I just figure out, okay, how can we steer this into something productive? And I play the long game. And this is why I'm able to get some of the great interviews I'm able to get, because I don't spend my time trying to call out everybody's flaws and idiosyncrasies. I find that to be counterproductive for humanity. A lot of us are on the same side. You and Scott, for a lot of this stuff, are on the same side. And, for us to be, it's one thing to debate fairly. It's another thing to, call each other the P word and doing all these things. It's very immature. I know you would admit to that. It's immature.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
look, because Hotep, the difference between you and me is that you are more mature and more gentlemanly than I am. I'm admitting it. I don't have a problem admitting it, because like I said before, sometimes there are issues that I take very, very seriously and that I'm going to treat seriously, and individuals with whom I might disagree with, but I will treat seriously.
Yeah.
But other things, when they devolve into farce, as my interaction with Scott Adams devolved, I'm just going to laugh and just have fun with it. I mean,
but you didn't have him nailed though. I could see if
I didn't quite catch that.
You don't have him nailed, right? And this is
because he ran away. See,
no, with his lucky argument,
because he was smart enough to know that if he stuck around, I would have nailed him to the wall.
I don't think so.
That's the thing.
I don't think so. No.
Okay, we'll never know. Okay, because he chickened out.
He didn't chicken out. You annoyed him. You called him out of his name.
No, I called him a pussy after he blocked me.
But before that, you were very annoying.
So what? So handle it. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
No, that's not how it goes.
I don't apologize for it. I don't apologize.
That's not how it goes to have conversations, is my point. It's like,
we are on the internet. This isn't like adults, okay? This is performance art. You got to understand what you're dealing with here. This is performance art, okay?
And I don't like your art, man.
Well, so what? You don't have to follow me like religiously and listen to every foolish thing that I say.
Yeah.
There are tons of other people that you can listen to. If you don't like my immaturity and my willingness to just throw shit at the wall, fine. There are lots of other people who are very stentorious, serious to the point of pomposity.
Yeah.
If you like that, go and follow those people and don't follow me.
So
because there's some shit that you must take seriously in life.
Yes.
There are other things that deserve mockery and ridicule.
Okay.
Scott Adams is of the later category. I don't make any apology for it. I'm sorry.
Okay, so
and like, for instance, let's talk about the interview he gave you. I listened to bits of it, especially at the beginning. Okay. And his whole thing that you can recap for your audience, the video clip, right? And he comes on your show, and the first thing he starts doing is saying that I'm a leftist. I'm totally BLM. I'm like down with the people. All this stuff of trying to shore up his anti-racist bona fides. I just found it funny. I just found it just goddamn funny. Because it was so transparently obvious that it was insincere.
But he's always been a leftist.
And
he's always said it. So how is it insincere? If I've even seen some people say, hey, I thought Scott was a leftist. What is this comment I'm seeing from him? That seems racist. So everybody knows Scott is a leftist. If you follow Scott, you know he's a leftist.
That goes to show I don't really follow him. I just follow what.
But it goes back to what you were saying before, right? Like you said, he fell for the whole medicine campaign. That's something a leftist would do. So it's proof that he's a leftist.
Yeah, and it's proof too then that the leftists rationalize everything as opposed to looking at things in the face, looking at the truth, as opposed to creating all kinds of rationalizations for uncomfortable truths that they are unwilling to face up to.
Yeah.
Insofar as the medicine is concerned, it was very obvious to any thinking person that nobody knew the effects of this, and to take it was insane.
Yeah.
Especially because there was this a coordinated attempt to suppress any kind of dissenting view insofar as the mainstream narrative is concerned. People who had
You froze.
The early symptoms of side effects of the medication, they were silenced and repressed. Oh shit, sorry about that. It's a narrate siren. Hang on, I'm gonna mute my camera to close the window here to make the sound better.
Okay.
Hang on.
He's in Ukraine. He's right in the middle of the war-torn country of Ukraine, as you guys know, is in the midst of a war with Russia. So,
so we get these air raid sirens like 4 or 5 times a day, and they're fucking annoying, if you ask me.
Real quick, let me just set some precedent here and let people know. After this, we're going to be talking about Ukraine, and I think he wants to expose some lies from the media. However, we're not going to do that here on YouTube. We're going to do that on Rumble. We're Hotep TV on Rumble. I want you guys to go and subscribe now while we wait for him to come back. Subscribe on Rumble. We're going to continue the conversation over there. We're going to end this feed, start a new feed on Rumble. That's going to be Hotep TV. And so go over there, subscribe on Rumble for Hotep TV. We're going to talk about Ukraine. I do have a few more questions for you about the Scott Adams thing, particularly your tweet and my interview with Scott.
Sure.
So on this tweet here, you said you didn't answer the question, Scott. Are you going to cuck out like a coward, or are you going to stand up for truth like a man? What did you mean when you said truth like a man? What is this truth you're talking about here?
Because I haven't lived in the United States for 20 years, okay? And I'm from Chile, okay? So from my point of view, the whole black-white racial issue in the United States is almost purely academic. It doesn't really affect me. And quite frankly, I'm here in Ukraine, and in this country, I'm not particularly popular because my analysis, commentary, and occasional reporting on the ground is not cheerleading the Zelensky regime. On the contrary, I'm extremely critical of them. Mm-hmm. And that's got me into a lot of trouble. Yeah. I'm on the Mirotvoret's hit list, which is the list of people who have been targeted for assassination here in Ukraine. And so, I got bigger fish to fry. And being called a racist or something is just so trivial to me insofar as my issues of concern at the moment. Okay. Yeah. But the fact is that a lot of the things that Scott Ritter was saying in that live stream that he made, it's common knowledge among white people in the United States. Mm-hmm. And just to put up my bona fides,
what's common knowledge?
I'm Latino, cabron.
You just did what Scott did. You put your
Yeah,
disclaimer
sure.
up. I'm Latino. Don't attack me.
I think that the over-racialization of society in the United States at this time, which is unprecedented. I mean, I'm 55 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, I've been around enough. And so the amount of racial resentment that has been stoked by the DEI movement, the CRT thing, it is pernicious and extraordinarily destructive to American society. Because what you notice when you look at videos of like some fender bender, and one of the people in the fender bender is black and the other person is white, irrespective of who's at fault, they start arguing. And the black person will inevitably latch on to, oh, you're white privileged or you're racist or something. And so you have to realize, especially the black community, you have to realize that the racial animus has been pushed relentlessly. And it has led to a situation where blacks and whites really, really don't get along. I mean, remember Rodney King's famous statement, why can't we all just get along? Mm-hmm. Well, the racialization of American society has led to deep resentment among the blacks in the United States and a great deal of fear among whites in the United States. And this is very obvious. And I'm 8,000 miles away from the United States right now. But even from this distance, it's so obvious. And it is extraordinarily dangerous because it's a recipe for extreme social unrest. I'm talking outright open violence of one group against the other. And what has happened is that it's been extraordinarily attractive to people in the African American community, because it's not because they are African Americans, but rather taking your failures in life and channeling them into resentment to a particular group is an age-old strategy to create social tension and social divide. This isn't new. This has been going on since forever, where your personal failures, for whatever reason, okay, instead of saying to yourself, I tried to do something and it didn't work out, I failed for whatever reason. Well, you say, well, it's not really my fault. It's the fault of this other group. This group is the reason that I'm unhappy. This group is the reason that I'm failing. This group is the reason that I'm not getting what I think I deserve. We all think that we deserve, the sun and the moon, right? But this racialization of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the underlying philosophy of critical race theory, what has basically convinced so many African Americans is that whatever problems they have, it's not because of them, it's because of the white guy. And this is a recipe for social disaster. And you have a platform. I assume that a lot of people who watch you are African American. Well, you should be thinking to yourself how dangerous this is, because it only leads to attacking one population for some inherent characteristic when they had nothing to do with whatever failure or unfortunate event has befallen you. And so, but you're blaming them. I'm talking about you in particular. I'm talking in the abstract. And so what happens is that a person who feels this resentment will attack the object that they believe is the cause of their resentment, will attack them physically, violently. And what do you think that will eventually lead to? It will lead to a reaction, a counter reaction to that, and a counter reaction that will be just as violent, if not more violent. This has happened throughout history, where you have some group that feels aggrieved, justifiably or not, but their resentment is pointed to a specific group of people who had nothing to do with whatever was going on. But this is how, for instance, the Nazi killings happened. This is how pogroms happened. This is how the persecution of Catholics happened in Spain in the 30s. This is how all persecutions start, with a minority group teaching a majority group or a large group of people that all the problems in their lives are because of this particular group. They are the ones at fault. These people that have white privilege, these people who are, racist just because they happen to be white and not because they actually are racist. And this will inevitably lead to that group. If it is a minority, they will leave. If it is a majority or substantially large enough, they will lash back at this resentment that is unjustified. And so, yeah, that's my thinking on the whole issue.
So what's the truth that you're talking about here that you wanted Scott Adams to face?
The truth of the matter is that what he was saying was absolutely true, that a lot of Black people feel incredibly resentful towards white, unjustifiably so, because the whites who are alive today had nothing to do with slavery. And this notion that there's systemic racism is laughable. It's quite the opposite. And the fact that white people are going out of their way to protect themselves from any Black person because they are becoming afraid. And this is the truth that's happening in the United States that is visible from 8,000 miles away, as I am today. And that's a very uncomfortable truth. And things are going to have to change in the United States, and a different mentality is going to have to be implemented so that we don't see this escalation in social division that will ultimately lead to violence and potentially a complete collapse of the United States, especially considering all the other very, very serious problems that are going on in the US, specifically the inflation that is going to be out of control very soon because of the collapse of the petrodollar, and the over-indebtedness of the government that is going to lead to catastrophic issues, and the fact that the United States, being as a country that is so spread out, is going to have serious problems insofar as supply of basic needs like food, like energy and water. Okay, these are problems that are on the horizon that are going to hit the United States. And so when you mix up this cocktail of toxic ingredients and you put this dollop of racial animosity, you got a recipe for disaster for any nation, not just the United States, but it's happening in the United States. We see it on the horizon.
So you agree with Scott?
Well, in many ways, yeah, but I wish that he'd go out there and say these things, but you know.
But he did. That's why he's under fire.
No, well, then why didn't he just try to fully explain everything? Well, look.
Well, that's what
I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to argue about what Scott Adams is doing or not. Okay. Well, this is my appreciation from what I saw of Scott.
Here's your statement. Your statement is, I bet Scott Adams will give a groveling apology. He'll claim he was taken out of context and will go away for a bit from social media to do some soul search and reflection on harm I've caused. So he has not issued an apology.
Not yet.
He's not going to go away from social media. He was streaming all weekend. He streamed today. And he's not going to be doing any soul searching.
Did he say that he was taken out of context?
Well, he always says that.
Yeah, well.
So you're 1 out of 3. You're batting 33%. That's good for baseball and maybe basketball.
It makes you into the Hall of Fame. You know, a 33 batting average. Yeah. So,
but for social media, that's not good. That's not good for.
Well, no, hang on. The groveling apology, he hasn't done it yet.
Yeah.
Right now, he's in damage control mode, trying to shut it down. Yeah, that's why he went on your show, for crying out loud. 2 days after this whole thing blew up.
That's not why he went on your show.
Yeah, that's exactly why he went on your show.
That's not why he went on my show. The reason why Scott Adams came on my show is, number one, I'm one of the only people in America that'll give him a fair conversation. One of the few. 2, I did a reaction video to his video because I understood Scott. When I saw the video, my first reaction was, okay, he's trolling. He's not serious when he said what he said. I knew he wasn't serious right away. So because I read him, he was like, okay, I can talk. And plus, he's spoken to me before. We're cool. We're friends. And I also said, Scott, I want you to come on my show. I invited him on the show. That's why Scott came on my channel, not to do damage control. He can't do damage control. Dilbert is gone now.
It's gone from everything?
Everything. His distributor canceled him. All the newspapers canceled it. And now he can only distribute it through his locals channel. So he can't do damage control. And he knows he can't do damage control.
And he's probably going to get canceled from locals too.
No, he's not going to get canceled.
Well, let's hope not. I mean, I certainly don't wish him ill financially or something like that. I'm not interested in that kind of thing at all. Making fun of him, sure, but wishing actual material harm on somebody else, no, certainly not.
It's Scott Adams. You said he was a midwit, right?
Yes.
To make the comment he made, either you're correct, he's a midwit, or he's smart. I don't think he made the comment he made in that video unknowingly. I think he knew exactly what he was going to say. I think he knew exactly the reaction people would have. I don't think he thought it would blow up this big and this fast, but I think he knew there would be a huge reaction. He knew what he was doing when he said what he said. That was planned.
I disagree, but
you think you think he meant it, or when you mean you disagree, what do you think his intentions were? Or did he accidentally say it, or?
I'm thinking.
Yeah, no, take your time. That's good.
I think that I don't think that he thought it would blow up the way that it did.
Right.
And had he thought so, he would have been more cautious about what he put out. I don't think that he had the. Quite frankly, I think that he thought he could get away with it. That it would be edgy and it would fade into the rearview mirror. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that he did not count on the fact that it would blow up. I certainly don't think that he thought it would blow his income stream out of the water the way that it did. And for that, by the way, I sincerely, when I said before that I would never wish any material harm on somebody, and I would certainly not put myself in the position of potentially be the trigger for that. I mean that sincerely, okay? Because I think it's really despicable to be canceling somebody for potentially unwise words or foolish words or something stupid that you said, or something perhaps that you believe that is controversial but is not pertinent or relevant to the work that you are doing. I mean, like, for instance, suppose I'm your employee and I say that the Buffalo Bills are a better football team than the Jets. I'm making something up. And you're a virulent Jets fan. You shouldn't be able to fire me because of that, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to cut my source of income, my employment, over a disparity of agreement. If I were to say, like, for instance, everybody of X racial or religious group or what have you ought to be executed, well, maybe that's certainly something. But giving out some impolitic opinion about things that everybody is experiencing in the United States, no, I certainly don't think that anybody should be canceled for that.
Yeah.
And I think it is a chilling effect on free speech. And it goes directly against what John Stuart Mill said about free speech, that we ought to have it precisely so that we can see ideas that are incorrect, but figure out why they are incorrect and not silence those incorrect ideas because they fester. And if you create a society such that if you entertain any idea that is not acceptable, that this could impact your livelihood, that's a disaster for a society reaching a better understanding of the reality that is going on within it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I certainly don't think that he should have gotten his comic strip canceled. And I don't think that he thought it through.
So I think my issue where I'm not understanding here is when Scott Adams said white people should move away from black people, you agree with that statement?
No, I say that most white people think that.
Okay. You're saying that most white people would think that. So now,
sure.
So I'm just trying to figure out.
I just want to point something out. I don't think that white people used to think that at all. Okay. But I think that the over-racialization, of the past few years has led to legitimate fears on the part of white people and also Asian people that, they feel that African Americans in the United States have become so resentful towards whites and Asians that just for safety's sake, it might be smart to just step away, give a wide berth, as it were.
But that's a wide net.
Yeah, but if you want to say that makes me a racist for pointing out something that.
Well, let's dissect that. Let's dissect that really fast, right? Because when you say white people think that, I think of two types of white people that move away from black people. You have, let's say you have a person on the right that's moving away from black people because he doesn't want to be near black people, and for the reasons you've just stated. Then you have the leftist who pretends to care about black folks, but when you look at his residence, he's in the Hamptons, he's far away from black folk, right? So which white people are you talking about when you say white people are moving away? Because there's also a contingent of white people who are going out and they're kissing the boots of black folk. And they're, trying to figure out some
they're a
way
minority. They're an absolute minority, and more often than not, those people are just virtue signaling. Okay, and their day-to-day life, they're not doing that at all. Okay, and the vast majority of people of any race, okay, are not politically opinionated one way or the other. They don't really give a shit because they've got bigger fish to fry. They've got the kids, they got the job, they got the wife, they got the husband. They're not concerned about these things. But what I'm saying is that because of the over-racialization of black-white relationships over the last decade or so, certainly in the last few years, it has engendered enormous resentment in the black community, and it is an easy cop-out for people to ascribe their own personal failures to some outside group, in this case, white people. And for that outside group to be wary and to be thinking to themselves, well, if most African Americans think that I, as a white person, am a bad person, and they might be hostile towards me to the point potentially of violence, well, then I'm just going to give them a wide berth. So what Scott Adams was saying in that clip is something that a lot of white people think and a lot of Asian people think. And it's worth talking about that in order to find a solution, because we certainly don't want, or at least let me rephrase that, because I do not consider myself American. The United States certainly would not want to have a society where one large demographic or two large demographics, white people and Asian people, feel that it would be to their best interest to avoid altogether another racial group that feels enormous resentment towards them. I mean, this is rational, and this is something that any normal society, any multiracial, multi-ethnic society would want to not happen, to not have racial animus from one group towards another.
Yeah, sure.
But on the contrary, what's happening is that in the United States, you have one political party that has essentially put the flag insofar as racial resentment and immediately racializing anything so as to gain a political advantage by way of exploiting the resentment of people aimed towards another group of people within the same nation. This is a recipe for social disaster.
Yeah.
And I think that bringing this up and talking about it openly is something worthwhile.
Yeah.
But the fact that Scott Adams, in his perhaps ham-fisted way, tried to bring it up, and it just became a clip that torpedoed his career, I think that what he should have done is just double down and said, look, this is what we're talking about. The issues that I have been discussing with you just now, that you cannot have a functioning multi-ethnic, multiracial society such as the United States, where one racial group has open hostility towards another merely by virtue of the fact of their skin color. This is a disaster.
Well,
I mean, I think that you would agree with me, right?
What's lost on me is, I agree. But what's lost on me is you sound like Scott Adams, and I'm trying to figure out how is it you have animosity towards him on this subject matter in particular when you guys are saying the same thing.
No, I don't have animosity towards him on this issue. I had animosity towards him about how he handles stuff.
Huh?
Yeah, because
okay, so let's run through, because he describes this as different acts, right? So Act 1 was him making that soundbite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Act 2 was the cancellation. Act 3 was his interview with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that the execution of it all was brilliant. I mean, if you look at it, like you and I right now are Act 5. Like Scott Adams has created a conversation that never would have happened. Now you and I are talking about this. We've got 900 people here in the chat. You know,
Hey, chat.
he made all of this possible. So to say it wasn't brilliant is just, when we're living the evidence of his brilliancy, I just don't get it.
No, because somebody in chat said it very simply. Scott won't own it.
Own what?
Own what he said and expand on it. And
But he did. The thing
Well,
Scott
okay,
said.
okay,
The thing Scott said is the thing.
Like
Here's the thing.
I didn't watch the whole interview that you had with him.
Right.
Okay?
But here's the thing. Here's what Scott's saying. Scott is saying everyone is saying he's wrong for saying what he said, but nobody disagrees with what he says.
Wow.
Like they're saying his tactics and his strategy and it was rude and it was racist. They're saying all these things, but they're not saying what he said was wrong. It is true. White people are moving away from black people. It is true. Black people have, you know, some sort of racial animosity towards white people. We all know this. We don't got to pretend like it's not true. But he's saying all that. And then he's like, nobody's saying they disagree with him. So when you have this, you know, angst towards him or whatever it is, this annoyance with him, I'm just trying to figure out, because I'm hearing two guys say the exact same thing.
It's what I said before about the issue of the medication. See,
but put that aside. I get that.
I mean, that's the background for me. From my point of view, it was premised on his pussying out before on the issue of the medication.
And that's what I'm saying.
Unwilling to admit the fact that he was wrong.
And
he had to rationalize it, as you correctly characterized his response. He rationalized it, as opposed to owning it.
But my issue is
like a man.
But
he didn't
my
own
issue
it like a man. He tried to say, "Oh, you just got lucky," you know, like a fucking pussy.
But
I'm sorry, he was a pussy.
But that's not what's said in your tweets. You're attacking him over what he's saying in his "it's okay to be white" speech, and not the vax speech. If it's the vax speech, say, yo, I got a problem with the vax speech, and let's say there, you don't actually have an issue with it. It's okay.
No, because I'm not gonna.
You got it. So let me finish.
You asked me, Hotep, no, listen to me. I mean, here's the issue. My backstory with Adams is that he pussied out on the issue of the medicine.
Yes.
You know, and didn't own the fact that he was wrong.
Yes.
And here again, you know, I had another opportunity to kick him around a little bit more. That's it. You know, there wasn't any grand plan from me. I was just having fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I get that.
Fun at the fact that he had made a fool of himself, and he didn't have the balls to expand on what he said. At least not on Twitter. Look, now that I'm blocked, I have no idea what he's saying. And frankly, I don't care. You know, I mean, look, the guy is not a big brain. And what has he written? A cartoon. Okay, that's all he's written.
Several books.
Well, you know, Win Bigly. Yeah, that's the name of it. Win Bigly. Okay.
No, it's a couple.
But anyway, the point is, I don't care. Okay, Hotep. I don't care. I care about the specific issue.
You do care.
No, I don't care about Adams. I care about the issue that was raised that has caused his implosion. But I don't care about the implosion itself or how he tries to dig his way out of it. I don't give a shit about some random cartoonist. I care about the issue of racialization of American society, especially as regards to the coming economic crisis that the United States is going to face. I care about that because what's going to happen is that you're going to have potentially a civil war in the United States, and the United States has nuclear weapons. Okay, I mean this is a big deal. Okay. This is a very fragile moment, historically speaking.
Yeah.
What some cartoonist is going to do insofar as digging himself out of this hole and reestablishing his career, I can give a rat's ass. That's not the important issue.
Right.
The important issue is this racial cleave that is happening in American society of open hostility of one group of people towards another who are the majority in the United States at this time.
Yeah.
I mean, between the Asians and the whites, they are the majority.
Right.
And there is a substantial minority, which represents 18% of the population of the United States as of this time, that is, you know, advocating and displaying open hostility towards this other majority. Do you think that anything good is going to happen from that? No, it's going to be a fucking disaster. that issue is truly serious. What happens to some random cartoonist is so trivial that it's
So-
really almost beneath us both.
I don't disagree with what you said. My issue is you choose when
You want me to be friends with Scott Adams?
No.
I'm never going to be friends with him because I don't respect
No,
him.
you have to listen. What I want what you're doing right now is you're choosing when to couple the issue and when to decouple the issue. At one point, you're saying, "Hey, I'm mad at him because of the medicine."
No, I'm not mad at him. I'm not mad
your
at him.
Your issue is because of the medicine, and then on the other end, you're saying, "Well, that's here nor there. I'm worried about the racialization of America." And my point is,
Is that legitimate?
And my
Let me
point
ask you,
is,
is it
and my
legitimate?
point is, and my point is, and my point
Okay.
is, okay, and my point is, which one are we talking about here so we can bifurcate the conversation? When I saw Scott Adams make his statements about the medicine, I was as shocked as you were. I made my remarks. I made my responses. We shook hands. We walked away amiably. I get what you're saying in regards to that issue. Now we have a whole new issue in regards to race relations between white and black people in America. This is a whole nother issue. And you're conflating the previous issue with the new issue, even though you agree with him on the new issue. And that to me doesn't spell sense.
No, I'm pointing out the repetition of behavior whereby
Okay.
when he is correct, he crows about it and claims to himself to be the greatest prognosticator since Nostradamus. And then when he fucks it up, he just, tries to scurry away
Yeah.
instead of facing the music.
Yeah.
That's the issue I have with the guy.
But I didn't see that on this one. Maybe with the medicine one, okay. But this issue, I thought he stood 10 toes down. Based upon my conversation with him. He said, yo, black people don't really mess with white people. Then he asked me, he's like, do you agree with this stat? I'm like, I'd like to see the stat broken down based upon level of income. Because I don't know what that would look like. But I would say the poll numbers are probably close to the truth, right? And he would say the poll numbers are probably close to the truth. And you would say the poll numbers are probably close to the truth. So on this issue, you and Scott agree. And that's just the thing that just...
Which is, I'm lost a little bit in the conversation. What issue specifically would we agree on?
That black people think it's not okay to be white, or a large portion of the black community, whether it's greater than 50% or less than 50%.
Or a substantial fraction.
There's a
substantial enough to have an impact, sure.
Yeah, we all agree on that. And I think we, well, you might not agree on it, but in our conversation,
no, I just said I agree.
In our conversation with Scott, he talked about a lot of solutions, right? And he's talked about ways that he's trying to help the black community and has tried to help the black community. How do you think we can ease some of the race relations here in America?
Well, first of all, we have to shut off this bullshit of DEI and that systemic racism exists, and it's all the fault of the system or the white guy, and that's pernicious. I mean, that's the first step, right? And insofar as any kind of reparations are concerned, I'm sorry, fuck that, because it's not fair. Like, for instance, in my own case, were I to move to the United States, I started paying income taxes in the United States. Why should my tax money go to pay reparations, considering the fact that none of my ancestors were even in the United States? I mean, I don't have any kind of ancestral ties to the United States. All my family comes from, originally Spain and Germany, and in Chile. We've been in Chile for since 1542. So close to 500 years. So why should I pay reparations for something that had nothing to do with me? Why should you receive reparations for something that you didn't suffer for? It doesn't make any sense at all.
So, first of all, your arguments are a bit antiquated.
The simple explanation is usually the best explanation, no matter how antiquated it might happen to be.
So I'll point out where your argument is antiquated, if you let me finish. So in the first place, where you say it would come from the taxpayer, the conversation could actually be resolved simply because you have corporations, specifically insurance and banks, who have already admitted to the wrongdoing.
Like what wrongdoing specifically?
Slavery specifically, right? So if there was to be a reparation, it wouldn't be a federal government issue. It could be a corporate versus the people issue. So the whole idea about taxpayers is, like I said, antiquated. As far as what you said, people aren't affected.
Wait a second. Isn't California going to be giving out reparation checks? Where's that money going to come from? From the state of California, which is the tax base, or debt?
I don't know. I haven't looked into that at all. Whatever information I've looked into that was very briefly. But again, I'm talking about a federal issue, and you brought up a state issue. So let's put that aside.
Well, the state of California is saying that they're going to pay reparations, and the state of California is going to pay those reparations. Where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from tax revenues, or it's going to come from the state issuing debt that will eventually be shouldered by the taxpayers of California. So the taxpayers of California are going to be paying for these reparations. A good chunk of those taxpayers in California are Mexican or of Mexican descent.
Sure.
What did they have to do with slavery? Did they have anything to do with slavery? Right. No, they didn't. The argument is not antiquated. It's here now. That
argument can be destroyed, but we're not going to do that right now. What I want to do is go to the second one.
It's so easy to destroy it.
Because I'm not the expert on it, so I won't do that here because I don't want to ruin the argument for the experts on the issue. What I want to do is I want to talk about the second issue where you said that Black people specifically are talking about issues that they weren't affected by, right? And again, that's an antiquated argument because reparations isn't only for slavery; it's also for the mismanagement of specifically Black communities. And Candace Owens has made some great arguments about how Democrats have treated the inner city and their cities. And you mentioned California. You can see the mismanagement in California, specifically LA County, the homelessness, et cetera, et cetera. New York City, you can look at the education, and a lot of that stuff is leftist teachers union, as Scott Adams has brought up. So when we talk about reparations, at that point, it's not just about slavery, which is why I came up with the hashtag Dems Must Pay, because if Democrats are the ones that have created this calamity, for example, even when we talk about redlining, that is an issue that, is nothing to do with slavery and is in the reparations conversation. So when people think about reparations, they think about slavery, but it's so much more than just that. It's Biden's crime bill. It's Clinton's crime bill. It's Vietnam. It's Reagan's crack era. It's so much more in that conversation where the federal government has done things that have basically disproportionately affected Black people. And that's what's in the reparations conversation. It's not just slavery. And that's why I say your arguments are a bit antiquated.
Okay, so it's basically, any policy that wound up having a detrimental effect to the Black community is the reason why there's going to be reparations. Is that correct?
Reason why there is going to be reparations? I don't know about going to be, but it's in the conversation from what I'm seeing. It's in
the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's bullshit.
Okay.
I think that the notion that some policy that was implemented at a specific time that turned out after the fact to have deleterious effects on one particular group or another doesn't justify the fact of demanding group reparations to that particular group because of the bad policy. If you want to talk about individual harm, I'm there with you all the way. If some policy caused harm specifically, if you could say that this policy, for instance, the drug policy, 3 strikes you're out, and you have some guy who got caught 3 times smoking weed, which is trivial, and he goes to jail for 20 years. Yeah, that guy should get reparations. Fuck yeah. Mm-hmm. But everybody of a particular group, just because of virtue of their skin color, no, I'm not down with that at all. See, if it's easy to show, like for instance, the 3 strike laws, I think that those are pretty good. To give you a specific example, in my own case, I was once ticketed twice in a row in Manhattan for walking my dog without a leash. I was living in downtown Manhattan near Wall Street, and I would take my dog out for a morning walk every day, bright and early. And there was some NYPD guy who gives out the tickets for that shit, and he caught me 2 days in a row. If I got in a third one and gone to jail for 20 years for this ridiculous policy, that 3 strikes you're out insofar as walking the dog without a leash, which would have been a horrible policy, of course. Yeah, I'd demand reparations as an individual. Okay. But like every Chilean American or every Chilean resident of the United States should get reparations because of an unfair law like that. That's absurd.
So you're not familiar with cases where it's been, the state versus the people?
You're talking about class action suits.
Yeah.
Which is basically the same thing, but all of the people in the class action suit had the same deleterious effect from the same cause. A class action suit, the whole point of it is to, rather than have 1,000 individual cases, you just agglomerate together all the cases that share the relevant harm caused by a particular policy. Are you saying that the entire Black community had a deleterious effects because of the 3 strikes law? That's prima facie not true. There are lots of people, such as yourself, for instance, you yourself. Did you have any deleterious effects because of the 3 strikes laws? No, you didn't. Okay, or I assume, I actually don't know your personal history. I'm just going to assume that you didn't fall into this category of going 20 years to prison for some trivial nonsense like smoking pot 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
And so, my point, and it's a very serious point, why should there be group benefit because of a deleterious effect that happened to a subgroup of that larger group? It doesn't strike me as fair at all.
Yeah. Well, I personally have not been affected by redlining. I haven't been affected by the 3 strikes rule. I come from a very semi-affluent family, and I've had a very privileged upbringing. So I myself have not been affected.
So
by
how would you
things.
feel about getting like 5-10 grand for something that didn't affect you at all?
I would love it.
Well, of course you'd love it. 5-10 grand. I know what to do with it. As you would too. I'd buy a new motorcycle or some shit, right? Yeah. But would it be fair? I mean, hand to heart, would it be a fair thing? Certainly not. I
think the issue is when we see the United States federal government create budgets and create money for so many different issues, and then when Black people say, hey, let me get a check, everybody's just like, oh, no. For example, like the Ukraine thing, we're going to go over to Rumble, Hotep TV, and have that conversation in a few. We're sitting there and we're watching checks get cut, and like, it was no problem. It just got cut, right? So we're like, Ukraine, they're not even Americans and they got money. It's just like, I'm Black and I do have some gripes, and Ukraine didn't have to go to the government and prove anything. They didn't have to file a class action lawsuit. So we're looking at like all this money go to all these different people. We watched the Asians get reparations, because they were put in internment camps. We watched.
But were they all Asians or just the descendant of the Japanese who were actually interned in the 1940s?
Japanese.
But all Japanese Americans?
No. The ones that were specific. But I'm just saying.
Again, this proves my point, because when you talk about reparations, basically it sounds to everybody else as every Black person in America.
All right, so let me cut you there. So let me cut you right there. Because if somebody can come forward and say, hey, I was specifically, affected by said policy, whatever it may be, right? Because of their lineage, let's say it's slavery. I have no problem with that person getting their just due, right? If, just like the Japanese, if they can prove that they were affected by the internment camps, then cool, they got their check cut. Native Americans, they could prove whatever, you should get your check cut, right? But when we see the Ukraine and we see the money going to wars and all these other different things, it's just like, you can't sit here and say, Black people shouldn't be upset when we're at the bottom of the totem pole. and we watching checks get cut to everything but us. And then as soon as we put our hand out, everybody's got a million arguments for why we shouldn't have our hand out, but everybody else had their hand out and they got something.
Yeah, I see exactly your point. But what you're really talking about there is the fiscal irresponsibility of the current regime, of the Biden administration in this case particularly. And going into extraordinary debt. I mean, this is basically the national credit card. They're going into extraordinary debt for this bullshit. And you're saying justifiably, well, if they're getting cash, how come we're not getting cash? But the issue is no cash should be going out of the United States because the United States can't afford it. Okay? Yeah. And so the issue of reparations, look, as a serious matter, I don't take it seriously because it's never going to happen. As a practical matter, it'll never be approved politically. Okay, there would be too many people screaming their heads off, the majority of people, because remember, Black Americans represent 18% of the population. They don't represent a plurality, or you know, I mean, or a majority, much less. And so there would be too much screaming and fighting. And the issue also is that the United States economy is in such dire shape that by the time, if reparations were actually approved, which I wouldn't put it past it, but by the time you actually get the check for $5,000, $10,000, or whatever it is, the dollar isn't going to be worth anything. I mean, you know, maybe with $1,000 you'll buy like a carton of eggs because that's the kind of hyperinflation that's coming on the horizon. And by the way, you know, this notion that hyperinflation is coming for the dollar, right? This is a real thing. This is a very, very real thing that people should be aware of. Of course, very few people are, except wonky economists and people such as myself who follow their crazy ass papers. But the dollar is going to break very soon in the next 5 to 10 years at the outset. And so, you know, the whole issue of reparations will become academic because maybe the law for reparations for Black Americans actually passes. But it will mean nothing because the cash that will be issued to people will be worthless. The stimmy checks during the 2020 malady, sure, that was actual money that you could do stuff with. But those reparation checks, by the time they actually roll around, I'm talking as a practical political matter, in terms of timeline and the collapsing of the American economy, they're not going to be worth shit.
Well, that's the same thing I've said. But that's the same thing I've said, right? So just so you're clear, I'm neither for nor against reparations. But I said if I was in the reparations conversation, I don't want the shit dollar. I said this, right? Like this is all like, you know, basic bitch takes here, right? You don't want the dollar. What I've asked for, and I said this during my stream with Scott Adams, was I want tax exemption. If I'm going to be included in the reparations conversation, I want tax exemption. Right? That doesn't hurt the taxpayer.
No, you shouldn't get tax exemption. You know who should be getting tax exemption? Families, constituted families with 2 or more children. They're the ones who should be getting tax exemptions, like they're doing in Hungary, like they're now starting to do in Russia, because the real issue in the United States is not an issue of reparations or any nonsense like that. The real issue is demographics. There are not enough people being born in the United States to maintain all of the fiscal obligations that the United States has incurred, specifically with Medicare and Social Security. And so if anybody should get tax exemptions, property tax exemptions and so forth, it ought to be legitimately constituted families, that is a man and a woman legally married, who have 2 or more children. They're the ones who should be getting tax exemptions. You know, I don't know if you're single or not. I'm assuming you're single just for the purposes of this conversation. You as a single guy, you shouldn't be getting tax exemptions. Neither should I, for that matter. It should be families, because families with children are the building blocks of every society. If you don't have properly constituted families that are raising children above the replacement level, then your society is ultimately doomed. And that's what's happening in the United States.
So in a conversation, what somebody could do is, like, instead of talking about what we're, you know, the same conversation, what they could do is they can create a whole new conversation, right? So that's what you did. You said, no, these people shouldn't get reparations. These people should get reparations. It's not.
No, I didn't say reparations. I talked about
tax exemption, right? Tax exemption as a form of reparations.
As a form of reparations.
As a tax exemption as a form of reparations, right? Right. So you created a whole new conversation, right? What I'm saying is, hypothetically speaking, if we had reparations for black people, hypothetically speaking, if we had reparations for black people, we do not want the dollar. We would ask for tax exemption. Your response to that was, you shouldn't get tax exemption. This group should get tax exemption. That's not what I'm talking about. I would agree.
My basic premise. You're ignoring my basic premise, which I think that reparations are grossly unfair, grotesquely unfair.
I'm not ignoring that. That's prevalent. That's obvious. We know how you feel about that. What I am saying is,
it's not how I feel. It's what I think.
Okay, that's how you think. Okay, that's obvious, Gonzalo. That's obvious. You said it several times. You made that pretty prevalent. My point is, yes, I agree. I would love to see tax exemption to those families. I would love to see it. I would love to see tax exemption in many different forms. All I'm saying is, hypothetically speaking, to counteract or to rebuttal what you said about reparations. You said if reparations came in the form of dollars, the dollar ain't going to be worth nothing. This is something that I've said. The dollar ain't worth much at all, right? Which is why I'm involved in crypto, which is why I'm involved in the Syscoin project. What I am saying is, instead of getting the dollar, which is going to be inflated into oblivion until the CBDC, and then there won't be no such thing as inflation. And that's basically how they're going to curb hyperinflation. But anyway, instead of going down that road, what I'm saying is move reparations into the form of tax exemption. Your response to that is no reparations for black people. I'm not going to argue that. That is your thought. That's how you think. I don't operate like that. I love allowing
people. You want reparations?
No, you gotta listen, bro.
Yeah.
You gotta listen.
I mean, everything you're saying is that you're basically saying, I was thinking about the reparations thing. I'm listening to you.
No, you're
not. And what
you're
saying is you want reparations.
I don't want reparations. I just sat here and said I'm neither for nor against reparations. I just sat here and said
everything that you are saying is premised on the fact that you want reparations.
No, it's not.
Admit it.
No, it's
being
not.
grown up and admit it that that's what you want. Oh, come on, man.
You gaslighting now.
I'm saying that's what you want. Your entire premise in this conversation is premised on the fact that you want reparations one way or the other. If they're not cash payments, then you want exemption from taxation.
I can tell you don't follow my content because I'm the same guy
I'm listening to you. What you're saying to me now? What you're saying. I have been listening to you, and I have been letting you speak. And what you're saying is that.
I'll say it again.
Okay, say it again.
I am neither for nor against reparations for black people. Do I personally want reparations? No, if I wanted, I'd be going out here trying to get it. What I am saying is, and I've said this before, I've said I'd love to see reparations for white people. This is what I've said on this channel specifically.
So everybody gets reparations.
Yes,
everybody gets reparations.
When we look
at, would it be better if everybody's going to get reparations? What if we don't blow this money on reparations and try to? What you just said that you wanted reparations.
I want to talk. I want to speak.
Don't speak
without getting cut off. We've seen things like the Ludlow massacre. We've seen several crimes against humanity by the United States government against people, specifically 1913 and 1933, okay? So we've seen several crimes. So I'm saying is, if we look at how the government has mismanaged the Constitution, everybody in America can make a case for all groups of people to get some form of reparations. What I am saying to you today, Gonzalo, is if somebody gets up and goes to the government and they have a gripe with the United States government, I am choosing the people over the government because the government is not on my side and I'm not on the government side. So how my brain operates is I go, here's a group of Americans on one side of the argument, and on the other side of the argument is the United States government. I am not choosing the United States government over the person, the individual, or the group of people, especially if they have a legitimate argument. So no matter who these people are, I'm going to go, you know what? The government was probably wrong. The government probably did something wrong in this. And there's many different operations that we can pull out and name, paperclip, all these different things, right? But my point is, if a group of people have a gripe with the government, I usually have a it's none of my business attitude. I might look into it. I might study a little bit. I might understand it. I might put a little bit of brain power to it and say, how could I make their argument stronger, right? And that's what I've done with the reparations conversation. As a black man in America, it's really hard for me to not ever put any brain power to the reparations conversation when by being black, I'm default thrown into it. So I have thought about it. I have thought about how to make better arguments. I've thought about how conservatives are very much against reparations, but when I framed it as the Democratic Party must pay, all of a sudden those conservatives have said, wait, I'm with that, right? So I'm all about trying to figure out how to help people get what they want from the country, because if we got money for Ukraine, we got money for the people. That's my point, Gonzalo.
Okay, well, my point insofar as money for Ukraine, I think it's unconscionable, and I think it's a big old scam by the people who are cutting the checks, because the money isn't actually flowing to Ukraine. They talk about $100 billion or $200 billion or however much money it's added up to and so forth. Most of that money is going back into the constituents of the politicians who are supporting those politicians, specifically the military-industrial complex. This is another payout. Just as the medication and the whole scamdemic was a payout to Big Pharma, the Ukraine conflict is a big payout to Raytheon, which, by the way, Lloyd Austin used to be the CEO of that particular corporation. Raytheon, General Dynamics, the whole laundry list.
Hold on. We're going to move to Rumble for the Ukraine conversation. I just want to complete this one really fast, and we're going to move into the Ukraine conversation. Hotep TV, subscribe on Hotep TV. We're going to talk about Ukraine on Hotep TV, and he's going to expose a lot about that situation. I just want to finish the Scott Adams conversation before we close this out. You can say that you and Scott agree on the "it's not okay to be white" conversation, right?
It's perfectly fine for any person of any race to be of that race. Just because of somebody happens to be of a particular race doesn't mean anything, insofar as their personal responsibility of how they have acted in society. And so to target a specific group merely by virtue of their race, which is what is going here with this racial resentment that is being pointed.
Is it okay to be white?
Sure.
Are you answering that from the first or third person?
What do you mean?
Are you answering that from the first or third person? Are you answering that subjectively or objectively?
It is objectively true that it's perfectly fine to be of any race. I don't think I could be any clearer than that.
Okay. Mainstream media, The Room, they talk about reading The Room. You've said that right now, in so many ways, it's not okay to be white because that's what this whole racial tension's about. Would you agree from that perspective?
I would say that a lot of personal resentments have been redirected towards racial animosity aimed towards white people and Asian people, and that is grotesquely unfair and detrimental to the American society in the long term.
So from that perspective, the answer to the question, is it okay to be white, could be no.
Rephrase the question, please.
If we were to read The Room, if we were to look at the way mainstream media is treating white people, we were to look at the way the Democratic Party, left, liberal, is treating white people, is it safe to say it's not okay to be white?
Yeah, I would say that the mainstream media and the established cultural norms at this time in the United States would lead any reasonable observer to conclude that white people are the cause of everything detrimental and bad in American society, which is quite obviously not true.
Who is the cause?
Who is the cause of all things bad happening in the United States? It's the American people themselves, because you can't individualize the responsibility of a grab bag of different problems that the United States has and pin it on one particular group of people. That's absurd.
Federal Reserve, you agree with its existence?
Do I agree that it is beneficial
that it should exist?
Oh, it most definitely should exist. It's perfectly rational to have a central bank, a monetary authority. Do I agree with Federal Reserve policy? Absolutely not. I think that banks should be the ones who set interest rate policy, not the Federal Reserve, because ultimately interest rates are the price of money. And what you want in a free market economy is for the participants in the particular market to, by way of supply and demand, creating price discovery. And so the Federal Reserve, by what it has been doing since almost its inception, but certainly over the last 70 years, has been toying with the federal funds rate in order to set interest rates to what they determine a priori is the best interest rate for the economy at that time, which I think is a bad thing. What the interest rate should be set by the supply and demand of money by the private banks. Private banks, not in the European sense, but in the American sense of private banks being, Citibank, JP Morgan, and so forth. The Federal Reserve should not be using its money supply tools to put essentially its thumb on the scale of interest rates.
So whose fault is it that it does that?
Whose fault? Well, you could go back to the Federal Reserve Charter itself, but certainly one could argue that Alan Greenspan is the person at this time most responsible for the cataclysm of the American economy, because he believed in two things. He believed that monopolies, so long as they didn't exploit consumers, were a good thing in an economy. Mm-hmm. And so he allowed monopolies to exist. And because of bureaucratic machinations, mm-hmm. he basically defanged all the antitrust laws that the United States had and allowed monopolies to flourish in the American economy, which we've seen has caused deleterious effects where you have monopolies and oligopolies controlling every single sector of the American economy to the detriment of the American economy. Because Alan Greenspan's argument, which is a valid argument in many ways, he said that competition is inefficient and leads to capital destruction, whereas monopolies are efficient and lead to capital preservation. And so therefore, it should behoove the government to allow monopolies, so long as those monopolies do not exploit the customers of those monopolies, which prima facie is a very intelligent argument. But the problem is with that is that it leads to monopolies starting to abuse their suppliers and subtly abuse their customers because they don't provide actual free choice to the consumer. Because in a monopoly, there is only a single supplier of a good or service. And so therefore, the consumer is sort of like stuck with whatever the monopoly is providing them. There isn't any true competition. And therefore, it leads to the stagnation of the economy if this is allowed to expand in every market in the economy, which is exactly what has happened. That was Alan Greenspan's first flaw. And the second flaw was that he paid attention strictly to asset pricing by way of the stock market. And he thought that an ever-increasing stock market, i.e. an ever-expanding capital base of corporate America, was inherently good. And so what happened was that he used the indicator of the stock market to gauge the health of the economy. And so perniciously, Greenspan, Bernanke, Yellen, and now Jerome Powell view the stock market as the only real metric insofar as the economy is concerned, and also the GDP. And so what they have done, what Greenspan was doing, was basically goosing the stock market by way of interest rates. And therefore, asset prices have ballooned. And this has led to a drop in the yield curve such that the capital has to go farther and farther out into the risk curve in order to get decent yields in return. And this has led to a misallocation of resources. And we started seeing this specifically with the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s. And we have been seeing it with the mortgage-backed securities that led to the global financial crisis in 2008. And now we are seeing it with a generalized asset inflation, where you have the price of assets is disproportionate to their income. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, and so we're coming to a generalized collapse of the economy.
Would you say that's the biggest issue facing America right now?
The economic issue? Oh, most definitely. The over-indebtedness of the American economy, both at a federal, agency, state, and municipal level, on the one hand, and the consumer debt, corporate debt, it's all going to go up in smoke. And so the people who are going to be holding on to those assets are all of a sudden going to be holding things that are actually worthless, because the only way to dig itself out of this hole is to print more and more money. There will come a time when, and it's the Minsky moment, it's called, after the economist Hyman Minsky, where the interest that you owe on the debt is more than you can afford to pay. Right. And that moment is going to be reached now. And so the Federal Reserve is going to have no alternative than to simply monetize all the debt that the Treasury Department is going to be issuing. And it's going to flood the economy with essentially worthless money. The other problem that's happening, of course, is because of the disaster of how the Ukraine situation was managed, the rest of the world, especially the oil and resource producing nations such as Russia, such as Saudi Arabia, they are de-dollarizing and they're starting to accept other currencies. And because of their lack of demand for dollars and dollar assets, the dollar is going to start to go down. Excuse me.
Let me go into some super chats, and then we're going to go into our Ukraine conversation over on Rumble. John Stevenson, he said, I can see why Scott Adams blocked Gonzalo. He's disagreeable to be disagreeable. He can't seem to think other opinions are valid.
No, I think other opinions are valid when they make sense.
Well, makes sense is sort of subjective, no?
No, it's not. It's pretty fucking clear when something makes sense and when it doesn't.
How do you know when something makes sense and when it doesn't?
When it conforms to reality.
Reality is subjective, no?
No, it's not. A point of view is subjective, but reality, objective reality in and of itself, it's there. The reality is there.
But reality is based upon point of view.
You feel a certain way about it. No, it certainly doesn't. The reality is detached from a subjective perception of it. And I can prove it very obviously, you know, like I can walk down the street, okay, and subjectively believe that there's no other vehicle on the street as I cross it and just get hit by a bus.
But we could look at the, but we could look at the, but we could look at,
objectively, I got run over and I'm dead.
But we could look at the same street. You could say it's beautiful and I could say it's ugly.
Well, no, but beauty is a subjective.
What's the reality? Well, that's what I'm saying. When we perceive the world,
beauty is not an objective standard.
Well, the conversation we're talking about is the desire, the creation of beauty, to beautify our world, to make our world better. That's what our conversation's about, right? So everybody's
no, it's not. It's not about beauty. It's not even about making a better society. It's basically outlining specific social problems that are occurring now that are self-evident. Okay, as to how to make a better society, each person has their own individual view of what would make a better society. Okay, but you know, like what we were talking about is not making a better society. We were talking about a specific social issue that is becoming more and more prevalent in the United States at this time, and certainly we weren't talking about beauty.
Okay. Chad Lamorne said, disagree. They weren't making their judgment based on evidence. Plenty of evidence prior to Magic Bug that pharma and health orgs weren't trustworthy. This is fact. This is fact.
Yeah.
Chad Lamorne said, Scott acted like we were stupid and got lucky. Great way to justify your own bad judgment and great way to keep making self-destructive mistakes. Trim Music. What are the effects on Scott's comments on the vast majority of black people who don't hate white people and are removed from the inner city stereotyped? The effect of comments. Black people.
I have no opinion on that.
Well, you know, I think you could just stop the question at, you know, what are the effects? Is it on Scott's comments or of Scott's comments? Let me see, because he says on. I thought he meant of, but he says on. What are the effects on Scott's comments? Well, it's kind of the same thing, right? On Scott's comments.
Yeah.
On the vast majority of black people who drink, are they removed from the inner cities? You know, that's. I'm
still listening to you. And I can still talk. I'm just going to go and freshen my coffee, and that's why I'm reading my camera. But I'm still here and listening.
Yeah, you know, I think that's my thing with Scott is you know, people are acting like what he said is going to affect black people. What he said is not going to change a damn thing. I think it can help more than it'll hurt. Sure as hell helped me. But I think what he said and what he did helps more than it hurts. But yeah, so that's that. We're going to head over to Rumble, Hotep TV, and we're going to talk about Ukraine. So you guys can join us over there at Hotep TV. And we're going to continue this conversation about Ukraine. He's going to expose some things about Ukraine. So we'll be back right after this commercial break. All right. So, Ukraine. What information do you have on Ukraine?
What specifically?
Well, you said you wanted to talk about Ukraine. What did you want to talk about specifically?
Oh, the Russians are winning.